There is a verse in the Bible that has started more arguments than almost any other. Atheists quote it to prove Jesus was not God. Pastors skip over it because they do not know what to do with it. And for nearly 2,000 years, entire church councils have fought over what it means. The verse is Mark chapter 13, verse 32. And it says something so shocking that some ancient scribes tried to erase it from the manuscripts. Here is what it says. But about that day or hour, no one knows. Not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Read that again slowly. Not even the Son. If Jesus is God, and God knows everything, then how can the Son not know something? That is the question that has haunted theologians for centuries. And today, you are going to understand every single layer of it. We are going to break down the original Greek word for knows in that verse. We are going to walk through the 4 ancient explanations the early church fathers gave. We are going to examine how a 4th century heresy forced the church to answer this question. And by the end, you will see that this so-called problem verse may actually be the strongest proof of something most people completely miss about who Jesus really is. But first, you need to understand where Jesus was standing when he said these words. It is the year 33, and Jesus is sitting on the Mount of Olives. Below him, the city of Jerusalem stretches out in the afternoon light. The massive stones of the temple gleam white and gold. Some of those stones weigh more than 500 tons. The disciples are staring at the temple the way tourists stare at skyscrapers. One of them turns to Jesus and says, "Teacher, look at these magnificent stones and buildings." And Jesus says something that freezes the air between them. Do you see all these great buildings? Not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down. The disciples do not argue. They do not laugh. They go very quiet. Then 4 of them, Peter, James, John, and Andrew, come to him privately. And they ask the question that will trigger one of the most important speeches Jesus ever gives. Tell us, when will these things happen? And what will be the sign that they are all about to be fulfilled? What follows is called the Olivet Discourse. It is the longest block of teaching Mark records from the mouth of Jesus. And in that discourse, Jesus describes wars and earthquakes and famines. He describes false messiahs and persecution. He describes the sun going dark and the stars falling from the sky. And then, at the very peak of this prophecy, he says the words that have caused more theological debate than almost any other sentence in the New Testament. But about that day or hour, no one knows. Not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Now here is what you need to notice. Jesus does not say, "I choose not to tell you." He does not say, "It is not for you to know." He says, "Nor the Son." He puts himself in the category of those who do not know. And that is what makes this verse an earthquake in theology. Because everywhere else in the Gospels, Jesus acts like someone who knows everything. In John chapter 4, he tells a Samaritan woman every detail of her private life without ever having met her. In Mark chapter 2, he reads the silent thoughts of the Pharisees sitting in front of him. In John chapter 11, he tells his disciples that Lazarus is dead before any messenger arrives. And in John chapter 16, verse 30, his own disciples say to him, "Now we know that you know all things." So how do you square that with a verse where Jesus himself says he does not know something? This is the tension, and this tension is not new. In the 4th century, a priest from Alexandria named Arius looked at Mark 13:32 and said, "This proves it. The Son is not equal to the Father. The Son is a created being. Powerful, yes. Exalted, yes. But not truly God." This teaching spread like fire across the Roman Empire. Arius was charismatic. He wrote hymns and popular songs that common people sang in the streets. And his most powerful proof text was this verse. If the Son does not know what the Father knows, Arius argued, then the Son cannot be of the same substance as the Father. The church had to respond, and the response came at the Council of Nicaea in the year 325. Over 300 bishops gathered from across the empire, and they declared that the Son is of one substance with the Father. That Greek word, homoousios, became the line in the sand. Same substance, not similar substance. Same. But declaring the Son equal to the Father did not make Mark 13:32 go away. The verse was still there, and someone still had to explain it. So 4 of the greatest minds in the early church each offered a different answer, and their answers are still the 4 main explanations you will hear today. The first explanation came from Basil of Caesarea, who died in the year 379. Basil looked at the Greek text and noticed something most readers miss. The phrase at the end of the verse, "but only the Father," uses the Greek words me, and me can be translated two different ways. It can mean except or but only, but it can also mean if not. Basil argued that the verse should read like this: no one knows, not the angels, and not even the Son would have known, if not for the Father. In other words, the Son knows because he is one with the Father. This flips the entire verse on its head. Instead of proving the Son is ignorant, Basil said the verse actually proves the Son is divine, because the only reason the Son knows is that he shares the Father's very nature. It is a brilliant argument, but it has a weakness. The parallel verse in Matthew chapter 24 adds the word alone, but the Father alone. And that word alone makes Basil's reading much harder to sustain. If the Father alone knows, it sounds like no one else does, not even the Son. So the church kept looking for answers. The second explanation came from Augustine of Hippo, one of the most influential theologians in history. Augustine proposed that when Jesus said he did not know, he was using a figure of speech. In Scripture, Augustine argued, the word know sometimes means to reveal or to make known. He pointed to Genesis chapter 22, verse 12. After Abraham passed the test with Isaac, God said, "Now I know that you fear me." But God already knew. He is omniscient. The phrase, "now I know," really meant, "now it has been revealed," or "now it has been demonstrated." Augustine said the same logic applies to Mark 13:32. When Jesus said the Son does not know, he meant the Son does not reveal. It was not time for the information to be disclosed. Thomas Aquinas agreed with this reading centuries later, and so did Louis Sperry Chafer, who connected it to 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 2. In that verse, Paul writes, "I determined to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified." Paul obviously knew other things. He meant, I determined to make known nothing else. If you apply that same meaning to Mark 13:32, the verse becomes a statement about timing, not ignorance. The Son was not yet authorized to reveal the date. It is a compelling answer, but it also has a problem. If you apply the same definition of know to the whole verse, you get a strange result. No one reveals, not the angels reveal, not the Son reveals, but only the Father reveals. And as John Calvin pointed out, it makes no sense to say that the angels do not reveal. The angels were never expected to reveal anything about the end. So the word know probably just means no, and the search for answers continued. The third explanation came from Gregory of Tours, who died in the year 594. Gregory offered the most surprising reading of all. He said the word Son in the verse does not refer to Jesus at all. He said it refers to the church, the adopted children of God, and the word Father in the verse refers to Jesus, who is the spiritual father of his people. Under this reading, the verse says that the church does not know the day, but Christ does. Gregory supported this by pointing to John chapter 13, verse 33, where Jesus calls his disciples little children, and to Hebrews chapter 2, verse 13, where Christ says, "Behold, I and the children whom God has given me." The strength of this reading is that it completely removes any question about Christ's ignorance. The weakness is that it requires you to read Son and Father in a way that goes against the entire context of Mark's gospel. Throughout Mark, the Son is always Jesus, and the Father is always God. Switching those meanings in one verse, without any signal from the text, is a very hard case to make. But there is a fourth explanation, and it is the one that most theologians across every major tradition have landed on. It came from Athanasius of Alexandria, the man who stood against Arius, and it requires you to understand something about Jesus that changes everything. But before we get to that answer, you need to understand the single most important word in this entire debate. The Greek word in Mark 13:32 that is translated as knows is oiden. Oiden is the perfect tense form of the verb eido, which literally means I see. In classical Greek, eido referred to seeing with the eyes. But over time, the perfect form, oiden, came to mean I have seen, and therefore I know. It is knowledge that comes from perception, not knowledge that comes from study or instruction, but knowledge that comes from direct sight. Think of it this way. If someone tells you it is raining outside, that is learned knowledge. But if you walk to the window and see the rain yourself, that is oiden. You know because you have seen. So when Jesus says the Son does not oiden the day or hour, there is a layer of meaning beneath the surface. He is not just saying he lacks a piece of data. He is saying he has not perceived it. He has not seen it. And this brings us to the answer that Athanasius gave, the answer that reshaped Christianity. Athanasius said that when Jesus spoke these words, he was speaking from his human nature, not from his divine nature. To understand this, you need to grasp the single most important doctrine in the history of the Church. It is called the hypostatic union, and it was formally defined at the Council of Chalcedon in the year 451. Here is what it teaches. Jesus Christ is one person with two complete natures. He is fully God and fully man, not half God and half man. Not God pretending to be man, not a man promoted to be God. One person, two natures, without confusion, without change, without division, without separation. Those four words, without confusion, without change, without division, without separation, became the guardrails of Christian theology, and they unlock the meaning of Mark 13:32. Because if Jesus has two natures, then it is possible for one nature to know something that the other nature does not. As God, the Son, is omniscient. In him, according to Colossians chapter 2, verse 3, are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. As man, the Son grew. Luke chapter 2, verse 52 says, Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. A being who grows in wisdom is a being who does not yet know everything, and that is not a contradiction. That is the Incarnation. Think of it this way. The divine nature of Christ holds every atom in the universe together at every moment. Colossians chapter 1, verse 17 says, in him all things hold together. But at the very same time, the human nature of Christ was an infant being held in the arms of Mary. The one holding the universe was being held by a teenage girl in Bethlehem. That is not a flaw in the system. That is the whole point of the system. The Incarnation means God entered the human experience completely, not partially, not as a costume, completely. And part of being fully human is not knowing everything. If Jesus always operated from his divine omniscience, then his hunger in the desert was fake. His exhaustion at the well in Samaria was fake. His tears at the grave of Lazarus were fake, but they were not fake. The Bible presents them as real human experiences, and Mark 13:32 is another one of those real human experiences. In his humanity, Jesus did not perceive the day or the hour of his return. In his divinity, all knowledge was his from eternity. Gregory of Nazianzus, writing around the year 380, put it this way, everyone must see that he knows as God and knows not as man. We are to understand the ignorance in the most reverent sense, by attributing it to the manhood and not to the Godhead. Now, if you are following closely, you might raise an objection. If the divine nature knows and the human nature does not, are you splitting Jesus into two people? That is exactly the question the early church asked, and it is exactly the trap they warned against. A teacher named Nestorius was accused of dividing Christ into two persons, one human Jesus and one divine Word, loosely connected like two boards glued together. The Council of Ephesus in 431 condemned that idea. You cannot assign certain actions to the human Jesus and other actions to the divine Son as if they are two different people. They are one person. And whatever one nature does, the one person of Christ does. So when Christ says he does not know, the person of Christ is truly saying he does not know. But the reason he does not know is that his human nature, through which he is speaking, does not possess that information. The divine nature is not absent. It is not switched off. It is, as John Calvin described it, in a state of voluntary restraint. Calvin wrote that in the Incarnation, the divine nature did not at all exert itself whenever it was necessary that the human nature should act separately. This is what Paul described in Philippians chapter 2, verses 6 through 8. The passage uses the Greek word ekinosin, from which we get the theological term kenosis. It means he emptied himself. But emptied of what? Not of his divine attributes. If he gave those up, he would stop being God. He emptied himself of the independent exercise of those attributes. He chose not to operate on his own authority. He chose to live as a servant. He chose to depend on the Father. He chose to experience human limitation from the inside. And that choice is what makes the cross mean anything. Because if Jesus was never truly limited, then his obedience cost him nothing. And if his obedience cost him nothing, then his sacrifice is just theater. But it was not theater. The writer of Hebrews says he learned obedience through what he suffered. Learned. That word means there was a process. There was real effort. There was genuine struggle. And part of that genuine struggle was not knowing. not knowing when the suffering would end, not knowing, in his humanity, the exact moment of his return, choosing to trust the Father the way every human being is asked to trust the Father. And this brings us to something most people never see in this verse. Most people treat Mark 13:32 as a problem to be solved. But what if it is actually a gift to be received? Think about what Jesus is really saying. He is saying, I walked your road. I did not hover above it. I did not skip the hard parts. I entered the uncertainty. I lived in the not knowing, and I still obeyed. That is the message of this verse. Not that Jesus was deficient, but that Jesus was faithful. Faithful in the exact conditions that you and I face every day. We do not know what tomorrow holds. We do not know when the end will come. We live in the tension of not knowing. And Jesus says, I have been there. Hebrews chapter 4, verse 15 says, He was tempted in every way as we are, yet without sin. If he always had access to the full playbook, that temptation is hollow. But if he genuinely did not know certain things in his human experience, then his faithfulness is real. And his example is one you can actually follow. Now, there is one more layer to this that most people miss entirely, and it has to do with the specific thing Jesus said he did not know. He did not say he was ignorant of everything. He said he did not know the day or hour of the end. But look at everything he did know. In the very same chapter, just verses earlier, he described the signs that would precede the end in extraordinary detail. Wars, earthquakes, famines, persecution, false prophets, the darkening of the sun, the shaking of the heavens. He knew all of that. He laid out the entire sequence of events. The only thing he said he did not know was the precise timing, and he told you why. Keep watch, he said, because you do not know when the time will come. The whole point of not revealing the date was to keep his followers alert. If you know the exam is on Friday, you study Thursday night. But if the exam could come on any day, you have to be ready every day. And that is exactly the posture Jesus wanted for his church. Constant readiness, not calendar watching, not date setting. Readiness. This is why throughout church history, every single person who has set a date for the return of Christ has been wrong. Every single one. And Jesus told you in advance that they would be, because not even the Son, in his earthly human ministry, operated with that information. If Jesus himself did not announce the date, what makes anyone think they can calculate it? Now, before we close, there is one more detail that most people never hear about, and it involves the manuscripts themselves. In the parallel passage in Matthew, chapter 24, verse 36, some ancient manuscripts contain the phrase, nor the Son, and some do not. The church father Ambrose, writing in the 4th century, claimed that the words, nor the Son, were inserted into Matthew by the Arians. He said the oldest Greek manuscripts did not contain those words. Jerome seemed to agree. But here is what matters. In Mark's Gospel, the manuscript evidence is overwhelming. Almost every ancient copy of Mark includes the phrase, nor the Son. Only one 9th century manuscript and one Latin text omit it. As the scholar Vincent Taylor noted, its offense seals its genuineness, meaning no scribe would have invented this phrase. It is too difficult, too shocking, too theologically dangerous to be a later addition. It is there because Jesus actually said it, and the fact that he said it tells you something profound. Jesus was not afraid of hard questions. He did not hide behind safe theological language. He said what was true, even when it would be misunderstood for centuries. And now, here is what I want you to take away from everything you have heard today. First, Mark 13:32 does not disprove the divinity of Jesus. It reveals the depth of his incarnation. He did not come as God wearing a human disguise. He came as God, living a fully human life, with real limitations, real growth, and real dependence on the Father. Second, the not knowing was not a weakness. It was a weapon. By choosing to live within human limits, Jesus earned the right to be your high priest, one who can sympathize with your every weakness because he shared it, not from a distance, from the inside. And third, the verse is not an invitation to set dates or predict the end. It is an invitation to live ready, to live every single day as if it could be the last one, not in fear, in faithfulness. The same faithfulness Jesus showed when he did not know the hour but still walked to the cross. He did not need to know the schedule to trust the Father, and neither do you. So the next time someone tells you that Mark 13:32 proves Jesus was not God, you can tell them something. You can tell them it proves exactly the opposite. It proves he was so fully God that he could choose to set aside the independent use of his omniscience. And he was so fully man that he could feel what you feel when you do not know what comes next. That is not a contradiction. That is the gospel. And that is the God who is asking you to trust him today, not with all the answers, but with something better, with himself. Now I want to hear from you. Which of the four ancient explanations made the most sense to you? Was it Basil's argument from the Greek? Augustine's idea that know means reveal? Gregory's surprising take that son means the church? Or Athanasius's two-nature solution? Drop your answer in the comments below. And if this changed the way you see this verse, share it with someone who is wrestling with the same question. Because the hardest verses in the Bible are not obstacles to faith. They are doorways into a deeper one,